Um, so welcome everyone to Humanizing Online in the final weeks. My name is Kim and I work in the Center for Teaching and Learning as a faculty developer, also teach part-time in communication. If you use social media, I invite you to follow me on Twitter. You'll see my Twitter handle there on the slide. And also we're gonna use the hashtag Humanize. So if you do wanna tweet anything or post on any other social media that you might use, we can follow those. So while I've been engaged in humanizing work for a number of years through both research and in my own teaching, I always like to acknowledge the fact that I'm very humbled by so many educators and scholars who have been doing this work and are doing this work. Many of you likely use humanizing strategies in your teaching or in your work. Whether or not you're familiar with the humanizing framework, I'll bet you'll see some things that you're probably familiar with that you're like, oh yeah, I do that. Okay, so I'm gonna start off. Oh, and I should introduce Enoch. He's our moderator today. He's in there somewhere. So what I'm gonna do is just kind of acquaint you to the session flow today so you get an idea of how it's structured. I'm gonna spend about the first 8, maybe 10 minutes if I get too chatty, minutes of doing just a brief presentation to bring us kind of together into the context of humanizing, knowing that it is a much deeper framework than we're going to be able to touch on today, but at least will give us something to work within. And then we're going to spend the bulk of our time in discussion, so about 20 minutes of the time. And in that discussion, what I'd hope we would do is that we can collectively curate ideas and resources that you can all walk away with at the end of the session. So I've created a shared Google Doc, which I'm actually going to post in the chat right now. And you'll see the link in there. I'll post it again later when we're going to come back to that. If you want to copy and paste that URL where it starts with HTTPS, you can open that in another tab or another browser window, and we're going to come back to that. And that's where we're going to curate our ideas. So during the presentation part, which includes right now, I'm just going to ask you to mute your mics, or Enoch will probably mute for you if there's some feedback or things like that. And use the chat box. So not asking you to be silent. I'm just going to go through this presentation a little bit. We're going to pause for some questions or thoughts, but I don't want you to lose those during the session. So please do use the chat for that during this real brief part. At the end of the session, what I hope that you walk away with is that you'll have an opportunity to discuss at least 2 humanizing strategies for online, and that you'll perhaps consider at least one that you might use in the final weeks of the semester. And that also you'll have an opportunity to locate a number of humanizing resources. And those are in that Google Doc, which I'll point to that later. But essentially that's something that you can walk away with. You all have edit access to it, and it contains a number of resources. Okay, so the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of draw us in by starting with a quick question. So I'm gonna launch a Zoom poll in just a moment, and so you'll see that on your screen, but this is the question that I'm gonna pose to all of you. So which one of the following online course features is shown to have a significant positive influence on student grades? And then you see the options here. You'll see it in the poll when it comes up, but you only get to choose one. Okay, so I'm gonna launch the poll. Let's see. Can everybody see that poll? If you cannot, either maybe post in the chat, or you can raise your hand, or you can just answer it if you see it. Okay, I'm watching the numbers come in. So it looks like we have almost everybody has responded. Enoch, you can't answer. No, I'm just kidding, you can. Okay, I think we're there. Okay, so I'm gonna end the poll and we are gonna take a peek. This is anonymous, which I should have said from the get-go. So here's the results. So what is the online course features that is shown to have significant positive influence on student grades? And so it looks like most of you answered interpersonal interaction. And this does not mean that all those other features don't also play a role, but we're gonna unpack that a little bit. So yes, interpersonal interaction is that particular feature. So I'm gonna stop this, close my poll, and then we're gonna go back to talk about this a little bit. So when we talk about these interactions, this is when a student feels that their instructor cares. So in a recent study, it was actually from 2016, of online community college students, these results showed that the only course design element that significantly and positively influenced grades was the quality of instructor-student interactions. But you might ask, well, how did students define quality? So the quality indicator was whether the interactions conveyed the sense that the instructor cared about their learning. So for example, instructors who used rich media tools, so like audio and video for interactions, they were more likely to meet that indicator. So again, be thinking about those audio, video, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. Yet in the same study, it was interesting that more students reported not having an instructor who cared, and even reported the need to teach themselves. So that was what was in the study in terms of the outcome. And this is a really interesting study, and I'm happy to share this with you. We've been using this in some other scholarly research that I've been involved in, and Dee Zhu, who's one of the authors here, is at UC Irvine, and she's done a lot of work in this area. But what does this all mean? What it means is that teaching matters online, just as it does face-to-face. So this is a comment pulled from this study, and one student described their instructor, she's just a one-of-a-kind type of instructor. She's someone I'll never forget just because of her passion and how much she cares. So when we think about creating this culture of caring online, we know that the cognition and the emotion are so interwoven in terms of learning. And we don't just leave our emotions at the door when we come into the learning space. And that's because thinking and feeling go hand in hand. They're not separate. So when I think about, kind of the things that we've been going through over the last several weeks, and now we're moving into months, I suspect that each one of you who's on the session today might be able to reflect on the past several weeks and identify some evidence of this. How many times have you just kind of pushed yourself away from your desk and said to yourself, I can't focus on anything right now. I just can't focus. How many times have you maybe been consumed with emotion at a time that didn't even really make sense? It's like, what am I getting emotional about? What is it? For me, I think one of the things that I've shared with folks is I feel so tired all the time, and I feel like there's no reason I should be tired. I'm getting the same amount of sleep. Why do I wake up, feeling like I'm in a sleep deficit? Well, when our emotional state is disrupted, so is our ability to process information. So again, if you're feeling uncertain, insecure, stressed, overwhelmed, the answer is connection. So it's really that human connection. It's time like these that we're in right now where it's important, although it feels like sometimes we just kind of want to pull back, is that we actually need to lean in, share our experiences, and recognize how interconnected we are. And we can do this even in times of physical distancing. And I think that's the key element here. So again, I'm going to present this framework around humanizing and knowing that there's a lot more than just these three components. And you'll find some resources on this in the Google Doc that I shared. But just to touch on this, humanizing strategies apply across all modalities. And, when we have that physical barrier of the online, it's even more important that we intentionally incorporate them because we have that physical barrier. Humanizing instruction recognizes that need for students to connect, which is often magnified in times of pain and struggle and frustration. So if we think back to that study where I mentioned, creating that culture of caring, this is where an instructor can, create presence to let students know they're there. So remember the audio and video that I mentioned, and be empathetic to students, listening to their stories and their contexts, and being really flexible. This might even be, giving them forgiveness on a quiz that they just weren't able to complete. And it's also about being aware of kind of what I call the pulse or the temperature of your students. And we talk about this idea that's sometimes thrown around, but I think it's really important. And that's the idea of being intrusive and reaching out. So it doesn't mean intrusive like getting up in people's business per se, but it's really about not waiting for your students to come to you. So look for ways where in the online environment, you can see where perhaps some students are checked out for some reason. And when I said checked out, I just mean that they haven't been participating or haven't logged in and whatnot, and reach out. But all of this begins with self-care. And I'll be the first to admit that that's a struggle for me, even not in times of pandemic. But I also know that it's imperative. If I'm going to be there for my students, I need to take care of myself first. So this is different for everyone, but the essence is, I think, is to be kind to yourself, be forgiving. We all have imperfections, and sometimes it feels like those are magnified right now. And maybe this means establishing a routine, taking regular breaks, even if you have to set a timer or whatever it is to get yourself to do that, and being vulnerable. And I think that, if we kind of translate that into how we can care for our students, is that when we show our vulnerability, whether it's we're sharing a personal struggle with our students, this can often open the door to students who might not otherwise reach out for help. It could be like, wow, my instructor is actually pretty approachable, even if they're not saying that in their head, but they might feel that. And then, thinking about ways where we can provide some gentle reminders or nudges, those are important. Frequent and specific feedback. And I think that, this is where students begin to feel like, hey, my instructor's there to help me get to the finish line. So again, the end of the semester, whatever that is. And I think, these are just a few small examples that can be huge in terms of our students. And I'm not going to go into too many details. It was just to kind of touch the iceberg because I really want to hear what you all have to say. So I'm going to pause right here for just a moment before we move into our discussions. Is there anything in the chat, Enoch, that we want to talk about, or should we jump into discussions and let you all talk together?
I'll just make it explicit that at the end of this, we'll forward any resources. Roxanne said it would be nice to see that study, so we'll make sure that we can share out.
Definitely. I'll add that to the shared Google Doc, and I can also, this is being recorded as well, so you'll have the recording. Great. Thank you. So I'm going to put you all in Zoom breakout rooms, and there's probably going to be, let's see, there's about 11 of us, so we'll probably have just a couple rooms, and we'll have 3 to 4 people in those rooms, just so you have enough time to use the time to talk. And we're going to go to that Google Doc, which I will paste again in the chat so you see it at the bottom there. And when we do that, the idea is we're going to process some of these ideas around humanizing, and the goal is that this resources is for you, and you're going to build on it and add to some of the things that you're already doing, some of the things that you might want to do, and look what other people are doing and might want to do, because I think that that's always useful to say, hey, I like that idea. I could use that in my class. So I'm going to put you in breakout rooms, so you'll see a little something come up on the screen in just a moment. But before I do that, I invite you to use video and or audio. Again, that's a humanizing strategy. So when your colleagues can hear you or see you, that's often, you can feel more connected. If you can just do a quick intro, like name and department when you jump into your rooms, that's always helpful if you don't know everybody in the room. And then I'm going to give you some discussion prompts. Those are in the Google Doc, but we're going to look at them real briefly. And if you have somebody in your breakout room that's willing to kind of type or scribe your shared ideas in the Google Doc, that will be helpful. So, you can all be in there, but sometimes it's nice to kind of identify one person that'd be willing to do that. Okay. So these are the 2 prompts that I'm going to pose to you. That doesn't mean that you have to stay focused on these, but this is sort of the framework that I set up just to get you started. So the first question is, how could you or do you show your students that you care during this time of disruption? And then what do you hope your students will learn from your approach to teaching during this time of physical distancing? And again, if you're not in the classroom, I'm actually not in the classroom this semester. So I think, if you can take these and frame those in the context with which you work with students, and actually even consider colleagues and think about those approaches. So you'll see on the slide at the bottom has a little white window that says breakout rooms. You're going to see that pop up in a moment. But before I do that, if you need any help, once I send you into the rooms, you feel like, I forgot, what did she say? Well, it's in the Google Doc, but if you need anything else, I'll be popping in and out of the rooms, but if you need something, I'll get a little message if you just click the ask for help button and I'll pop in there. Let's see. So before I send you into breakout rooms, what questions do you have? Anything you can think of? Okay, I'm going to stop share for just a moment because actually I'd like to just take a look at this Google Doc briefly, and only because I think it might be a little helpful to see what I'm talking about. So this is our shared Google Doc, has the same instructions and the prompts here. When you get into your breakout room, if you look at the top of your Zoom window when you're in the room, you'll know which room it is. And this is where I've kind of set up a little framework where you can type in your group's ideas in whatever breakout room you're in. I made 100 of these because I thought there was going to be like 500 people on this call, but no, I'm kidding, I didn't. So we're going to jump in. I'm going to go ahead and enlarge my window here so I can see the breakout rooms. Okay. So I am going to make 3 rooms and I will see you in one of those rooms. So enjoy. Welcome back. For those of you that have joined back, I think everybody should be here. Should get a bigger monitor so I can like see everybody at the same time. Okay. So I'm sorry that I had to pull you all back because I know there was still some things happening in the Google Doc. Such a short session, I know. So maybe we could just go around briefly. We have about 4 minutes left and just kind of go to each group. Maybe you could highlight a few things of maybe something from, showing that you care, and the other part, what you hope your students might learn from your approach. So can we start with group 1? If somebody from group 1 want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll just speak to that as I was scribing. So the idea of showing that one cares, we could see in the list here everything from, what does it mean to like listen closely and empathically? So often we jump to solutions, or you should try this or try that. And really it's not about the solutions. It's about people voicing their status. But we also talked about how important it is to reach out regularly and on an individual basis to students. And there's a number of ideas here. Given time, won't go through all of them. However, something that really surfaced was this idea of complimenting each of the students and just acknowledging what one appreciates about them. And then Patrick threw out a cool idea about like these weekly parties, like these weekly virtual parties, and one of them being an idea of drawing together where students can invite their friends. So it's open. We've learned a lot about what students are thinking and feeling through their drawings in that medium. So those were just a few of the highlights.
Excellent. Thank you. Anybody from breakout room 2? Want to share like 1 or 2 highlights?
The big thing is just setting aside the extra time, whether we're teaching asynchronously or in real time at the end of the presentation, just to have shared time to talk about life stuff like, the taco truck, things that, we're used to doing.
Yeah.
That's another one. And one of the things, some of the things that we're hoping that they learn from this approach is, how to be more resourceful, how to be more active learner, and then also flexibility on both ends,
Right.
the student and the instructor.
Wonderful. Yeah, I like the idea of just making time to talk about people stuff, life stuff. I think that's really important. Okay, how about breakout room 3? Anybody want to highlight? Is that Meredith or Jamie?
Well, we only got through the first half. Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
No worries.
We only got through the first half,
Okay.
but we thought about showing you care in terms of offering options, that's in terms of flexibility, to give students choices, and then to follow up. And when I was thinking about follow up, I was thinking individually. So to keep track of, trying to keep track of students individually as much as I can. And I have 85 students, so that doesn't go around as evenly as I would like, but where I see someone slipping behind.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I know kind of a term that I've been using are what we call our high opportunity students, or students that might need more high touch. And one thing that I learned in the last year is that there's a little notes column in the Canvas gradebook. So if you're using Canvas, there's a little notes column that only you see as the instructor. And you can put notes in there, perhaps about students that you feel like, for whatever reason. And the example that I have is I had a student last semester who let me know actually early on in the semester that he had dyslexia, and there were some of my materials that he was having a little bit of struggles with. So I made a little note in there, and I only have 25 students, so 85 I know is a whole bigger one, but I really wanted to like remember that and associate it with that student in a way that to make sure that I was, staying on top of that. So anyways, just a little trick. Okay, well, I'm gonna stop sharing this because I'm just gonna kind of go back to our slides so I can wrap up for us. Thank you so much for all of the ideas and sharing and just being willing to be on this session today and talk about some of those things. These resources at the bottom of the document are the ones that I'm going to refer to in a moment, but this might be some areas where you can dive a little deeper into some more examples of humanizing. One of them is something called wise feedback, which really looks at balancing between, supporting, that growth mindset, but also bringing in the context of ability and also action, like what can the student do, particularly in providing feedback. So let me stop share here, go to my other thing. Okay. So just a few things. So this is the document that's in there. That's the resource in that Google Doc. And I just want to say thank you. And if there's anything that the center can do to support you, we're still doing consultations, and you can reach out, make appointments, anything that we can be here for you. We're here to listen to. So